morning, listeners. My name is Christian.
And my name is Micah, and welcome to the Morning Ponderings podcast.
We are a podcast where we explore the possibilities allotted to us by the limits of our knowledge and understanding.
And the goal of that is so that empathy for others can flourish.
So good morning, Micah.
Good morning. I guess it's not morning this time, but
It's true.
Good afternoon from, yeah. How
Well,
is it
for our
going? How's
listeners,
your day
it may
been?
or may not be morning.
Oh, yeah. True, yeah. Well, it probably, whenever we release it.
Yeah, we've got like 2 weeks of stuff that has happened in between episodes of us talking.
Yeah.
So I listened to the episode with your brother, and it sounded awesome. Wonderful conversation.
Thank you. It was fun. It's always good to talk with my brother. We have very similar minds.
Man, so I am now a dad of 2. That's been crazy.
Woohoo! Congrats.
Thanks. Right now, my oldest is off at preschool, having a wonderful time, and my wife is watching our newborn. And this is like a moment of peace where we are remembering just how weirdly easy it is to take care of a newborn compared to a toddler. It's really funny because, like, in the very beginning with your first child, that newborn phase is like, oh my goodness, what are we doing? What is happening? What is going on? This is so difficult. Yeah. But now that it's our second child, it's like, we don't have to worry about this one running around and digging in the toilet or trying to flush a toilet roll down the toilet or just making a gigantic hurricane of a mess.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that makes sense. So how did everything go? I mean, like, we haven't talked in like a couple weeks, and I mean, obviously because you're in the hospital and having the baby.
Mm-hmm.
So how did everything go?
It went really well. Kelly's doing great. The baby is healthy. Was born at 8 pounds with a successful VBAC. So we're very happy about that. And the recovery so far has been much better than that of the C-section before. So,
wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
It's been a really, really nice one. Topically relevant. I have also, in the last 2 weeks, once again engaged with family members on matters of beliefs and how they differ. We won't dive into that too far right now because the whole episode's going to be devoted to that. But that's been fun, a point of stress, but also a really great content generator. I have a lot of things I want to talk about on TikTok now, and also has really informed what I hope we'll talk about today. So
for sure,
those are some of the bigger things that have been happening in my last couple weeks. How have things... Oh, yeah, and also I finished building my office, which is really cool.
Woohoo, yeah.
Viewers who are not watching a video, because we don't really release a video apart from highlights, probably can't see it, but it's nice. I like it.
That's great.
So how's your last couple of weeks been, Micah?
It's been pretty good. It's been kind of just busy. We've been looking at a lot of houses, and... So, like, today we actually went and looked at a house that looked at for a second time, and we're hoping to make an offer on it.
Ooh,
but with the
serious.
market, well, we are, but the market's so crazy that it's like almost just half serious because we don't know if we're going to be able to offer enough to be over some of the other people, and they're having open houses all weekend, and so they are bound to get a lot of offers. So we're going to make an offer and really hope for the best because, I mean, we have some things in our favor as far as making an offer, but we obviously don't have like cash to like just throw down on the whole house. And if somebody has that, then, we're out of that running. But it's exciting. It's exciting to be in this process, but it's a lot. And, work has just been a lot. Like, I've gotten more hours the last couple weeks than I normally do, just because people are like going on vacations and we're ramping up for the holiday season. And so they just need me to work more, which is good. I want to work more, but
you are getting extra income though from that, right?
Yeah, I am, and that's good. But I don't like get overtime because I'm working two part-time jobs, so
Mm,
neither of them I will get overtime for, which is dumb. But
that is
that's
very dumb.
it's the stage I'm in right now, and so hopefully I'll get full time soon. Who knows?
Yes.
But that's been good. I mean, I have kind of dove back into making music, and so like I made a lot of progress in the last week on the album. I like decided like, I'm just going to start a bunch of songs and not like get see them to completion yet. And I
Hmm.
did that and actually brought a couple of them like pretty far, I guess not like super far on the journey on the music making journey, but it's
Mm.
been a lot of fun making those and actually seeing some progress.
That is so cool. By the way, how is any updates on the guitar repair? Like, I can't remember how long ago it was that you took that in.
Yeah, no updates. I'm still waiting for a call. So still could be another like 3 weeks. Who knows?
Fun.
Yeah,
Well,
it
how
is
has
what it is.
music recording been going apart from that?
I mean, good. I'm starting to like experiment with different sounds that like I normally wouldn't use. And that's been fun because some of the sounds I'm like, man, I really like that. So part of me worries that the album won't sound super cohesive because like certain ones sound
Mm.
very much like a real live band, and then other ones is all like very electronic instruments, and like you might have a guitar, but that might be the only real instrument in the whole song. So,
Hmm.
working on trying to make it cohesive. Like all the thoughts and ideas and emotions of this album are very much connected,
Mm.
but musically, I'm trying to kind of tie them all together. I think I'll probably work on that whenever I get more of
Yeah.
it done. But
Yeah. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about how like music theory and everything like that comes together. I have some very surface level knowledge because my wife is super into music theory, and I've got kind of secondhand music geekiness. But
yeah,
yeah, I imagine like maybe if you like have all the different sounds that you're using, but maybe like some kind of a central theme, which I mean, you have a central theme to your whole album, so maybe that'll be enough to kind of help things feel cohesive, even if the sound can be varied.
yeah, and I mean, I'm using like my voice will be the same the whole time, like um and some things that are consistent is like obviously the guitar will be consistent kind of through a lot of the album. Some of the songs don't have guitar. And then I use piano in a lot of the songs cuz those are my two main instruments, so that's what I'm best at. But yeah, I don't know. So it's been fun. Sometimes frustrating because sometimes I'm like I don't know where to go from here. And it
Hmm.
just it takes so long. Like it just is a long process making music. And so it's frustrating to like have this goal that I'm working towards, but it just is so
Mm.
far away.
Yeah. So speaking of the amount of time that you're pouring into making music, the amount of time you're pouring into two part-time jobs and a marriage, and just house hunting, all those things, I imagine your calendar's looking pretty full there, huh?
Yes, it is. It's pretty full.
Yep. And you had
Yeah.
mentioned this earlier, so that's a bit of a segue
Potential
into letting
change.
our
Yeah.
users know, or listeners know. Yeah, there's some potential change on the horizon.
Yeah, we've been, this is episode 10, so if you've made it this far, like congrats. You've listened to us this long. But we have been doing a weekly thing, and we might kind of maybe switch things up to kind of doing a bi-weekly. We might have Josiah on a little bit more. Like we might invite him back. I've not actually asked him yet, but I'm sure that he would be down because, making an episode with him was fun, and we could definitely do that again.
Hmm.
And so yeah, just keep your eye out. We will definitely like come up with something concrete so that we're not just like, oh, we might do it weekly sometimes and then bi-weekly sometimes and miss a week here and there. Like we want to be consistent with whatever we do. So we will
Hmm.
let you all know. But for now, just be aware that changes are coming because editing takes a lot of time, and time
Hmm.
is something that I don't have a lot of at the moment.
Yep. Micah's our only editor. I would help with editing, but I am also wrangling a child, two children now, and
Yeah,
maintaining a
yep.
marriage and a full-time job. So both of
With a
our
lot of
plates are
other
pretty full.
Yeah, with a lot of other change in your life. And
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of change coming in my life with buying a house. So It's been crazy, but
Mhm.
we'll make it through. And I mean, we both enjoy making this podcast, so we're gonna keep going. But yeah,
Well, I mean, if there's any shameless plug, but if there's any listeners who have some extra income that they would be willing to use to support us, then maybe you can give enough that Micah only has to work one part-time job, and then he can do editing. Who knows?
that
But
would be wild.
that'd be really cool. But I mean, that's kind of the dream. That's shooting for the stars. We'll see what happens. But for now, we're not doing this as a means of income. We're doing this mostly as a means of growth and somewhat reconstructing ourselves after the deconstruction that we've been through and figuring out where are we? What are we doing? What do we do now? And
Yeah.
how should we align our thoughts with our beliefs and our actions? So that's why we're here.
That is why we're here.
So speaking of which, if I recall correctly, maybe this was something that was 3 weeks ago, but in the time of the recent past, you also had a conversation with your family, one of your family members, about what you've been going through in terms of your beliefs and what that journey has looked like. So, as a way to kind
maybe
of...
we should... Yeah, let's introduce what we're talking about, and then we can get into that a little bit. Today, listeners, we have decided to kind of change gears. We may have said in the last couple podcasts like what we're going to talk about, but we decided that we're going to kind of change course for today. We are going to talk about, in the midst of deconstruction or changing your beliefs or growing, kind of however you want to describe your journey of learning and growing and finding out who you are. So one of the things that is just really huge in that is, how do I navigate my family relationships, especially when my family is very religious or even slightly religious and just very firm on what they believe. That's something that is a struggle for, pretty much everyone that I talk to. And a lot of questions are, how do I talk about it with them? Like, do I need to talk about it with them? Do I need to just kind of silently do this myself and just pretend like I'm still a Christian or still believe whatever they believe? How do I do that? And I think that's one of the most terrifying things, at least for me. Maybe not the most, but it's pretty huge when it comes to changing your beliefs. And so that's what we're talking about today. So maybe I'll ask you. So Christian, for you, I know you've told me a bit, like obviously in our like personal conversations, but what has it been like for you? And you say you have some updates now. Just talking with your family about your changing beliefs and like how have you navigated that? Maybe you could throw in like how you wish you would have navigated it, if you would wish it any differently, and just where you are in that process.
So as the person that I am, I have a list of different analogies and approaches and angles that I could take in order to try to engage with my family on this particular topic. But what that list kind of centralizes around is a goal, which I feel like should be the goal for anybody who's going through this process. But I don't want to tell other people what to do or how to think. But I feel like it's a pretty good goal in that my goal is not to invalidate my family's beliefs, but it is to try to argue to validate my beliefs. And that can be really difficult because oftentimes it feels like it's my family's goal to invalidate my beliefs and or use emotionally manipulative tactics to try and bend me into conformity. And that can get really frustrating and sometimes a bit anger-inducing sometimes, which can make it difficult to not then return the favor. So, as the thinker that I am, I just ponder and ponder and ponder to come up with all sorts of ways to approach it. And so we can talk about some of those, and we can talk about a bit of what we have done. You asked me a bit about what I've already done.
Yeah.
I've had an interesting experience. in that I started off, the conversation really started, and I hadn't really left Christianity per se. And I guess you could say to this day, I haven't necessarily, like, I don't know. I'm in a weird place in that I have this, what I call the bag of hoping. And it's just a bunch of different possibilities that I cannot confirm, nor can I deny that they are possible, or that they are reality, rather. They all have to be possible. And in that bag is Christianity, a very specific form of it, among many other things. And so I have it in there to situationally be brought out whenever I'm faced with a situation that would otherwise be hopeless, that maybe Christianity can bring some hope or value to. So I haven't necessarily fully turned my back on Christianity, but I have turned my back on Christian exclusivity, and that it's not the only source to which I turn for hope and truth. I'm realizing I have a guitar here, and it being right next to me while I talk, I occasionally get like some resonance. So I'm gonna move it. So I, in the very beginning, started talking to my parents about this when Christianity was a little bit more of an exclusive thing that I would turn to. And I got a little bit of a taste for where things would go in the future should Christianity not be an exclusive thing to which I turn, because I miscommunicated some things and made my parents think that I was just outright agnostic, in that I didn't claim to know if God existed or not, which was true, but also that I was completely apathetic towards that train of thought and that world of thought. That I think their conception of an agnostic is that they just frankly don't care if God exists or not, which isn't necessarily me. If God does exist, I think that might be a valuable thing to know, or a valuable thing to consider. I got that first taste of invalidation from, I don't know if I want to be specific about the members of my family that did it, but
you don't have to be
tough.
specific, but maybe like, what were some of the things that they said to you?
Oh, well, the question was asked like, oh man, are we going to have to be the ones to take on the responsibility to bring our grandkids to church now? And I'm like, wait a second, hold on. Like, one, Kelly and I aren't even necessarily planning on leaving the church anytime soon. But two, if we did, and if we wanted that to not be a part of our kids' lives, are you telling me that you would try to pressure us into letting you do that? It felt like a blatant disrespect for where I could possibly go spiritually. Yeah. And so that was tough to hear, among many things. One of the things that was mentioned, which was really got under my skin a bit, was this idea of like equating my relationship with God, specifically the Christian God, to that of a marriage, and that by considering other possibilities and other possible beliefs, I was basically being adulterous. And if I'm going to be adulterous towards God in that way, then how in the world can Kelly trust me to be loyal to her? And
yeah, well, maybe because Kelly's a real person that you can see and touch and know
exactly exists. the way that I thought, I of course that stuck in my mind, and one of the ways I thought to talk about that issue is it's more like there's a fictional character that, or maybe they're not fictional, I don't know. It's more like there is somebody who may or may not exist that I have decided loves me, and I have decided wants to be married to me. This person is now my spouse, and they have given me no indication to verify whether or not they are in agreement with that matter. So I have then gone to proceed to tell everybody, hey, I am in a relationship with this person, and they love me, and every good thing that comes my way in life, I assume is somehow they're doing. And that's just a further confirmation that they love me and that they are involved in my life, even though I have not seen nor heard them ever. And so it's not a marriage or a relationship like that when only one person has confirmed or expressed a desire for that relationship to exist.
Right. There is no relationship, because relationships by definition are two ways.
Exactly. And I mean, one could make the argument that, well, God expressed his desire for relationship with you on the cross and through the Bible, but maybe that is the case. However, if that is the case, God has not made known to me and expressed to me that that is the source that I am to look to confirm that or to know that. Like,
right. And
literally,
just because your great grandpa buys a car for you, even though he's never met you or never will meet you, like doesn't mean there's a relationship there. Like there's still no relationship because you've never
mhm.
met. Like you
Yeah.
can't. Yeah. Anyway,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
and it might not even be that they. It might be that I watched a movie and the character that may or may not actually exist in that movie does something heroic and saves the world. And you're now asking me to interpret that as their desire for me to love them as a spouse.
Yeah. It's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, it really is. And maybe I'm not understanding the analogy properly. Maybe there's more to it and I'm watering it down, and maybe this is a straw man argument, but this is my response to my understanding of what is going
Yeah,
on, and
sure.
clarification may alter that in the future. And that actually really goes into everything else we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I think
But
like just as a side note, like I think it's like the analogy of a marriage. Like I do like understand that like if you're talking like biblically and like some of the images and pictures that they use, but then for someone to take that and then say, "Oh man, like if you're going to do this with God, then you're going to do this with your spouse," then it's like that's just not even you're not even comparing the same things. So like that's
mhm.
I don't know, that's just pretty low.
Yeah, it's apples and oranges, literally. Well, not literally, but apples and oranges. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of, those were some of the part of my family that I was engaging with at this time. I mean, they tried to relate to me to some extent, and when they did try to relate to me, I was like, oh, they understand. Like, they actually get me. They actually get where I'm coming from. Maybe I'm not alone in this. But then later, this, as they would call it, the spirit of fear came upon them, and they then came back with all their worries and concerns, and it's like, yeah, no, you guys didn't actually get it.
No.
So that's how the first interaction went, which caused me to do a lot of preparing for the second interaction. But before we dip our feet into that, how did your first interaction with talking with family about your changed beliefs go? And what were some of the takeaways that you felt you gained from that?
Man, yeah. So my family had no idea I was still like a pastor, or I wasn't ordained, so I was a minister at a church, like their worship and youth minister. But I was like planning on stepping down for a long time because I just did not believe almost anything that they believed anymore, and I still believed in God, but like just not anything like my family or the church believed. So there was
Hmm.
just no point in me staying there. And so as I kind of was stepping out, they still had no idea. They still were hearing me like preach on Sundays, which was always really painful because like I was kind of taking these new things that I was learning about reality and like some of the things that I was starting to really believe about the world, and not even necessarily God, but like I had to use like the Christian language in order to get that message
Hmm.
across. And people actually really liked my sermons, but because I also was pretty knowledgeable on the Bible. But it was painful to hear people like kind of like praise me for saying like, man, you just like did so good, like God was really
Hmm.
speaking through you this morning. And in my mind, I know what I said was probably the opposite of what they think. Like how they interpreted the things that I even just said was probably not even close to what I meant. And
Hmm.
that was always painful because like I would be seeing things in the
Hmm.
world that, like regarding to like COVID and like Black Lives Matter and just the way that the church treats people in the LGBTQ plus community. And I would preach sermons like without mentioning those specific things, but that's like basically what I was talking about, is like how Christians have like outcast and rejected people and like is causing so much harm, and like without explicitly saying that obviously, but just
Hmm.
calling us to do better. And they would say, man, that's so great. And then I would just see like no change, and like that was just so hard. And then immediately So like there was my parents had no idea. Like no one in the family had any clue. No one in the church had any clue
Mm.
until like literally I think it was the day after, literally the day after we got back off of our last Sunday, whenever we had moved back to Kansas City, and never going to that church again, probably not going to another church again. My little brother had a friend who found my TikTok and showed my little brother. And my little brother had just got back from like a Christian camp. And so he was really fired up. And it was like an apologetics camp. And so he was even more so fired up on like, I'm going to beat you in an argument kind of thing. And so he, without asking me, without talking to me, he showed my parents my TikTok and like showed that they watched like every video. And so I get a text from my older brother saying, hey, mom and dad have seen everything. They saw your TikTok. And absolute panic. Like just
I imagine you turned white as a ghost.
It was bad. I wanted to throw up. Like it was so bad. And they hadn't communicated with me yet. All I knew is that my older brother, I don't know how he had communicated with my little brother. Obviously, I think my little brother was like quote unquote concerned for me and my salvation, and like talking with my older brother about it, and then revealed like, oh yeah, I showed him mom and dad.
That must have been kind of interesting. Like if you and your older brother have kind of seen eye to eye through the process, I wonder how that conversation with your younger brother and your older brother went. Do you have any insights into how that went?
Slightly. I mean, my little brother didn't know how much Josiah agrees with me. And so, he like they talk about things, and Josiah's really good about like having discussions with people that he disagrees with without like super revealing that like your view is horrible, if it is horrible. And so, they would talk about things. And so we actually got in a group chat like immediately, our like little brother group chat, and was like, all right, so this is out there now. And so we just like started talking, and my little brother wanted to argue about why being gay is a sin, and I was just like, I don't have the energy for you, like, but biblically you're just like kind of wrong, but okay, whatever. I mean, even if you're right, I just think that's wrong, and so I don't care necessarily. But so I thought, I don't want to wait until they call me. So I just texted them and was like, hey, can we talk tonight? They knew why, and I knew why. I mean, I wanted to do it on my terms. And so as terrified as I was, there was no going back. They had seen everything. Like they had seen way too much. They had seen me say the F word for the first time, which was one of the like handful of times that I've even said it. But so I go over to Josiah's house. I call Anna on her way back from work because she started work that day, and was like, hey, you should come to Josiah's house. Just to warn you, we've got about 1 hour before we talk with my parents because they saw my TikTok and they know everything. And she was terrified. Oh my gosh, it was so terrifying. And so in my situation, at least like with my parents, like we will get to like a part 2 because we do end up having a conversation with my wife's mom, which we'll get to. We'll kind of go back and forth, but I didn't have a choice on whether or not to tell my parents. They found out, and so it was like, all right, it's out there, so we got to talk about it. And I didn't want to not talk about it because this is a big deal, especially like for the person deconstructing. Like it's a big deal, and I knew my parents had questions and were anyway. So we talked for about 45 minutes. I'm glad I was able to go over to my brother's house, so I had some backup. So it was me, Anna, and Josiah, and talking with my parents and kind of just sharing our sides of things because they didn't really know about him either. And he had been talking about how he really wants to like stop pretending like he agrees with them on everything. And I mean, I wanted to do the same, but I wasn't ready for that conversation. So I think that's important to say is like, I was not ready for that conversation. It happened. And so like, it just was one of those things that had to happen, but I was not ready for that mentally. I didn't have much I didn't know what I believed. Like it's hard to have conversations when you don't even really know what you believe. I definitely now more so know more of what I believe, but it was difficult. And I will give a lot of credit to my parents because they handled it really well. They didn't say a ton except that like they love us, and they asked us, which I think this was like this question blew my mind because I just don't hear stories about this. Like they asked, how can we be a part of your journey if we can be a part of it at all? And that was like a huge deal for me because like they didn't just assume that they could just barge in and tell me
Mm,
everything I need to believe. Like they actually asked my permission to be a part of this journey.
that is very
And
respectable and very
yeah,
respectful on their part.
yeah, definitely. And so it went well. Obviously my mom cried, and my dad, like, it was tough for him, and things have been kind of awkward since then just because they're so used to talking with me about Christianity and what I believe about God, and now that we don't talk about that, it's hard to know
Mm.
what to talk about, I think.
Like, what does the relationship look like now? Just figuring all that out. I feel
Yeah.
like that's
And
another
so
part of the scariness of it all, is that like nothing is ever going to be the same. Like it's
no.
going to significantly alter so much relationally, and figuring out what that
Yeah.
then looks like, if it doesn't look like the end of the relationship completely, then what does it look like thereafter? And that's a
Yeah.
scary prospect.
It is. And like it sucks because like in my mind and just where I am now, it's hard to think that just my change of ideas, like literally just the change of my beliefs changes so much about our relationship and like my relationship with family. And that just like sucks. Like that I
Mm.
get it's a big deal, and like whenever you're in it, like you can't see like just how like I don't know, just how exclusive that makes your religion to think that like you just have to demonize everybody outside of it, and then
Mm.
somebody you really love is outside of it all of a sudden, and like it's just hard to know like how to handle that. And so I will say though, the amount of anxiety, sorry, my watch is going off.
I
The
couldn't
amount of
even hear it.
oh good. Like the amount of anxiety that I had of just them finding out, obviously that anxiety went away because they found out, and I stopped having to live a lie that I felt like I was living. And like I think that was, there's always a trade-off. Like I didn't want to live forever hiding. I didn't want to live forever pretending and like living my inauthentic self. And so like
Mm.
one of the trade-offs was now I get to live my authentic self and be real and like be open about what I actually believe and not like pretend that I believe certain things. But with that, yeah, my relationship with them has changed and things are awkward, and like we are still like navigating kind of what it's going to look like. I have no idea what it's going to look like.
Mm.
I mean, it definitely is better than I thought it would be, but it's just weird. Like it sucks to go from being like your parents, I don't want to say favorite, but like the one that they're super proud of, the minister who's
Mm.
preaching and leading worship, and like the strong Christian who has like an incredible marriage. It's like centered around God. And you go from that to the heathen. Man, it was like, yeah, it's been really tough. Like, I actually, one of the songs on the album is kind of about that experience and about
Mm.
those emotions. And man, it's,
Yeah.
it's
I can
sad.
actually relate to that very directly, because one of the things that was asked while I was talking with, I'll just say it was with my parents the first time
Yeah.
around. One of the things that was asked is what happened to the little Christian who ran around and felt compelled to ask everybody if they knew Jesus, and who was so devout and so full steam ahead for Christ. And one of the things that I think my parents, like, my name originally was going to be Jesse, but that changed due to circumstances with my mom's best friend having a baby that they were going to name Jesse, but then the baby
Yeah.
passed away. So they ended up naming me Christian, and they did that with a sense of like, well, at least we know he'll always be a Christian.
Yeah.
And beyond that, even,
Yeah.
uh, a point of, I don't know, pride for them. I don't know. But the first week that I was in church as an infant, apparently there was this elderly gentleman who rarely ever spoke, who was sitting behind my parents in the church. And after the sermon and the worship practice, he was bawling and crying. And he came up to my parents and he said that God told him that I was going to be a great leader of, the way I heard it said, a great leader of many nations one day.
Classic.
And so now it's like, I swear to God, I'm not the Antichrist. I do not claim to be the Antichrist. Because initially when I heard that, I was like, oh, that must mean I'm going to be doing some awesome things for the kingdom. There's no way I could possibly fall away from Christianity, and there's no way that that could be interpreted to mean that I become the Antichrist. But, I mean, well,
oh, no.
The way things are going. But, I mean, I'm pretty sure that the Antichrist is somebody who literally claims to be Christ incarnate. I am not Christ incarnate. The fact that I am saying that should be enough, I think, to make it obvious I'm not the Antichrist.
Yeah,
I do not claim that.
The whole, maybe sometime we'll have to talk about the whole doctrine of the Antichrist, but like the modern conception of it is absolutely ridiculous and so far from what the original intent was that like it's not even worth entertaining sometimes. But anyway.
Yeah. So with that prophecy spoken over my life from early infanthood and all of the energy that I poured into, because I believed it was the most important thing, Christianity and spreading the word of Jesus. And so I devoted myself very fully into that. And so one of the questions I would ask is like, well, what happened to that Christian? It's like, I'm still here. And in fact, one of the approaches I was wanting to take, because when you hear about somebody who starts to question whether or not God exists and starts to waver on whether or not to remain within Christianity or to hold on to it in any way, one of the thoughts that can tend to cross a person's mind, and it crossed my mind once before when I was talking with atheists, was that, oh, you were never really a Christian.
Yeah.
And in a way, like, I understand the chain of reasoning that leads to that conclusion. So my response to that is this. If there is a form of Christianity which interacts clearly with a God that exists, then that, and that is what true Christianity is, then yeah, I've never actually been a Christian. Because I have never been a part of that kind of Christianity. And what I found is that I had made an idol out of human understanding. And that understanding was not God. That understanding yielded fruits of destruction and ostracization and hate. And so, recognizing that I had been worshiping an idol, I decided to cast it down and go seeking for the real God, if there even is one. The truth,
yeah.
Yeah, go seeking for the truth. So I want to maybe, as I haven't approached them with this angle yet, but I want to approach them this angle and ask the question, can they be happy that I recognized I was worshiping an idol and now I'm actually seeking real God? And if they truly believe that those who seek will find, then this should be great news. This should be really exciting news for them. Or would they have rathered that I continue to worship an idol and then teach my children to worship that idol?
Yeah, and I think the really difficult part is, like, you can say that, but if you don't come to the same conclusions as them, then they're not going to see you as valid still. At least, like, Christianity, like, won't see you as valid, because that's a huge thing in very conservative evangelical spaces is, you know, oh, it's okay to question, it's okay to like seek answers, but whenever you come to different conclusions based on the evidence that you're finding and based on like what you actually believe, because like you don't necessarily super control what you actually believe, then they're going to say that you're just wrong, and they'll tell you to keep seeking, and then they'll tell you, here are the answers, here is our like microwaved answers for you that are just, you know, frozen burrito style. And Sorry, I'm getting insulting now. But anyway,
No, I totally get it, because that actually really played into how things kind of went with the second interaction. But before I dive into that, was there something else you were going to add?
nothing. I just I don't mean to be rude. I think it just like there definitely are a lot of very prepackaged answers that as Christians you are kind of told to give that I just hear over and over and over again. And one of those is like you were never really a Christian, or like all of these things that are like all these responses like just lack so much depth and substance that
Mm,
it's but in their mind like it's the truth. And so it's just so hard to like even have a conversation. Like how do you have a conversation going from like, hey, here's what I believe, oh okay, I guess you never were a Christian. It's like, well, what am I supposed to say? Am I supposed to try to convince you now that I was? Like that's a weird
mm-hmm,
thing to do. And like I've done that because like I think I want to show my story as valid and show how much I was so bought into this and like how
mm,
Christian I was. Like I was exactly like you, like any like Christians, if you're listening, like I was exactly like believed all those things. I was so deep into it. And then
mm,
for someone to come in and just like, just because you like change some things, like just immediately say all of that was a lie is so disrespectful because
mm-hmm,
it just completely invalidates so many years of your life that you spent so fully committed. And it's really hurtful, like especially like if it's just random people on the internet, whatever, you don't know me, I don't
mm-hmm.
care about you. But whenever it's coming from your family who has watched you, you know, it's that's painful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I totally understand. Like, there was a time I was talking with this one guy who was an atheist, who had a history being a Catholic. And when I learned that he was previously from Catholicism into atheism, I was like, oh, well, of course, like maybe you just didn't meet God for real because that wasn't the right denomination. That's not the right kind of Christianity. You need to go seeking God. Like, just because you didn't find him just because you found one denomination to be faulty doesn't necessarily mean that all denominations are faulty. That's when you start to seek. And then if God is faithful, then then you will find him. And that was kind of my mindset. And so knowing that that was my mindset, and knowing that that's probably that might be the mindset of the people who asked that question too, it's hard because there's this desire within to defend my status as a Christian previously. But I'm not
Hmm.
sure how helpful that actually ends up being, because then it just becomes a defensive back and forth argument, as
Yeah.
opposed to if I validate what this person is thinking, because this person's thinking, if you ever really knew God and you actually had that encounter with him, of course you wouldn't walk away. If you had that evidence, if you
Yeah,
had that
exactly.
tangible experience, then you would have never walked away. And the only way that you could have not had that tangible experience is if you were never really a Christian. And
Yeah.
so, in a
Yep.
way, that's true. I haven't had those experiences. I haven't. And the God that I was worshiping was not a God that was confirmed by any divine being. It was just a understanding of God that I was told I had to believe in. And
Yeah.
so I feel like, and I haven't practiced this yet, but I wonder if a much more productive conversation would be yielded from an approach of validating where this person's coming from and then working from
Yeah.
there.
Well, oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, it definitely would. But I mean, another part of this is this theological mindset of like once saved, always saved. If you believe
Mm,
that, then like if somebody walks away, then they like that's your theological box. And so if somebody doesn't fit into it, then you've got to stuff them into it. And that's what you do is you say you never were really a Christian. Or you say, you'll come back, I know. Like because if you really were a Christian, you'll come back. But if you don't come back, then you never were a Christian. And like it's just a way of like really dehumanizing people and just seeing them as some theological point that you have to fit in your box.
mm,
And they don't know they're doing that. And so like I don't think these people are malicious, but I just don't think they
for
fully
sure.
understand like how hurtful it is whenever they say certain things. And yeah.
Yeah, I
So
totally agree.
is that how your most recent conversation went? Or
Um,
I guess what was
not
that one?
so the most recent conversation. That's not how it went, because that's something that's a direction I might still take it, because it's still a little bit ongoing. But the way that the second conversation went, I approached it really wanting to find common ground, and especially the idea of faith and what is faith. Specifically faith from a biblical standpoint, not necessarily faith from the popular standpoint, because the popular understanding of faith, unfortunately among Christians and atheists alike, is that it is belief without evidence. You just believe it even though you have no good reason to. But that's not necessarily the biblical definition of faith. And although I don't necessarily believe, granted I don't have good reason to believe that any of the Bible is divinely inspired, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't still find that its writings are valuable and pull from that something. So I look at the writings of Paul, and I look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, where he defines what faith is. And I especially like the definition of faith that he provides, in that it is confidence in what we hope for and assurance in what we cannot see. And depending on the translation, that's ESV, I believe, but depending on the translation that you read, it can tend to vary. And sometimes some translations will throw in words of like, it's certainty in what you don't know, and all this kind of stuff, which makes sense for where those ideas of faith came from. But that totally conflicts with Jesus's teachings on what faith is, because you cannot be certain and uncertain at the same time. You can be either absolutely 100% certain, no new information could be provided which would change my mind, or uncertain with a varying degree of confidence.
Right.
And so Jesus, when he talks about faith, he talks about it quantitatively in that you can either have a little bit, a medium amount, or a lot. But it's never a binary, you either don't have it or you do. And that's why he uses phrases like ye of little faith, or faith the size of a mustard seed. So it's more of a spectrum of faith as opposed to a binary of faith. And so my hopes were to find common ground in that this definition of faith requires three things. It requires hope, which I feel like is where free will comes into play, and that hope is based upon your personal desires for what you hope to be true. And if we are to dismiss that, then we dismiss free will. Confidence, which is backed by assurances, so this would be reasons you might have to be confident that this possibility is true, be it the testimony of other people, some experiences that you've had, apologetic arguments. A lot of those things fall under assurances, not proof. So those assurances warrant confidence. And then the third one is uncertainty, because the moment you're certain about something, you no longer need to hope for it. And when you no longer need to hope for it, you no longer need to have confidence, because now you're certain. So faith and certainty cannot coexist. One moves from a place of faith to a place of certainty, but when you do that, faith has shut it off. So my attempt with the second conversation I had with, this time it was my grandfather, my dad, and a friend of my grandfather's that my grandpa apparently looks up to. I was having a conversation with these three, and I wanted to start off like, okay, can we agree that certainty is a privilege that God is not required to give everybody, and it is a non-essential thing? So long as a person can have faith, that is all that is required of us. And can we agree that faith is these things, that it is confidence and a hope in a place of uncertainty, such that if by the end of this conversation I am still in a place of uncertainty, can we agree that that is a non-issue, that that is not going to be a problem? So that was my introduction to this conversation, and it sounded like everybody agreed with me at first. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. My grandpa even spouted out a little catchphrase. You like, place faith plus nothing. And it's like, okay, cool. So now that we can agree on that,
all right,
I listed out all of the information that I have gathered through almost 10 years of seeking at this point.
Oh, wow.
I talked about all of the different manuscripts that we have available to us, which ones are the earliest and what they are and what they consist of, and what we can then pull from that, and what we can know and what we can't know.
You really went for it.
Oh yeah. I laid out
okay, yeah,
everything, like all of the information that I've been able to gather, and what conclusions I can pull from it and what conclusions I can't. And so in talking about scripture, I laid it all out and I was like, okay, and this is the reason, these are the reasons why I can't be certain that scripture is of God and that scripture is without corruption and that it has not been manipulated. All these reasons, laid them all out, clear as day. And then I even went on to talk about my life experiences. And it's like, now I recognize and I accept that I have experienced good fortune in my life, which would suggest that there's some kind of intentionality on behalf of maybe a God working in my life. I totally recognize that. I totally accept that possibility. I do not reject it. I am not forgetting it. Here's what I've experienced, and this is why I can't conclude that God exists from those things. And I can't conclude that if there even is a God, that they are the Christian God. But with all of this information taken into account, these are the possibilities that I can arrive at, and these are the ones that I find worth hoping for. Yeah. So these are the ones I have faith in. So I did all of that. And I ended with, I have faith in the possibility that there is a limited God who, the reason why the world is as terrible as it is because they don't have the power to make it perfect. They're just doing the best they can. And they are working in people's lives. And any good thing in my life, which might have been as a result of their work, is something that was orchestrated and planned beforehand and not done in real time, such that I don't feel like God's wasting his time working in my life of privilege when he should be saving 6-year-olds from starving to death in another country. Yeah. So that is a concept of God, which, though I do not claim to know if it is true or not, is something that circumstantially I might hope for.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was hoping in doing all this, what this might accomplish would be that either they would provide new information, that they would try to provide rebuttals to different points that I might have made, and help me to then recognize that maybe there's other possibilities of God which are worth hoping for. My grandpa's friend tried a couple of things which really didn't hold water at all. Like, they were complete straw man things. And I pointed them out as such, in such a way where there was no further rebuttals. So I think there was like only 2 things that were brought up, and they were completely pointless. And I made sure that was known. And nothing else was brought up. Nothing else was mentioned. Nothing else was confronted or dismantled. Yeah. It was just disappointment. And fear. It's like, how can you be disappointed and fearful? Oh, one of the other things that I made sure to mention throughout all of this is that I realized that I had spent so much of my life and my time pursuing the relationship I wanted to have with God and reading into all of the information that I had been provided to assure myself that God wanted to have the relationship I wanted to have with him. I switched from that to earnestly seeking out what kind of relationship God might want to be having with me. Yeah. And so taking an honest look at what information do I actually have versus what information have I assumed.
Right, yeah.
And from the information that I actually have, what conclusions or what possibilities does that allow for what possible relationship God might want to have with me? Yeah. And so I had mentioned that, and I'd mentioned, so now I'm seeking a relationship with actual God. So in a way, I guess I kind of took a different kind of approach of that whole idea of like, I've discovered I was worshiping an idol. Yeah, I had done that, and I was hoping that they would be like, oh, you've obviously devoted a lot of effort into that seeking. Like, that's much is clear. I was hoping I'd garner some respect from them because I was giving them information that they didn't even have. Yeah. So I'd obviously been doing this, and
obviously you've thought very deep about this. I mean, you had a whole list coming into this, and like, even like your whole thought process, your process on on faith and everything, like that is a very deep way of looking at it, and the idea of like certainty. It's something that I've thought about, but maybe not as deeply as you have. But I think you're, very spot on with that. Like you can't have certainty and faith; that those things don't go together. But it, I think that is one of the big things that's really disappointing in talking with people, like family members who don't agree, is like you've done so much work. Like I don't know many people in deconstruction who just like don't do much work or don't think about it much. But then like the response you get, like they just think you're wrong without doing any work. And it's just like, man, like I have put in so much time to like trying to seek this and discover this, and like you won't put in any time before even thinking that I'm wrong. Like you are just so convinced that I'm wrong, but won't do any work to find out. And like that sucks from our end, like to just be completely like just disregarded for all the like time we've put into like trying to form who we are and like figure out what we believe. And then man, yeah.
It's like, sorry. You went through all of that work and the conclusion you reached isn't my idol. So you're wrong. It's like,
yeah.
Are you not even going to tell me why or how? Are you not going to address literally all of this information that I've laid out before you? And it's just no. And I think a lot of it is that, like, for example, my dad says that he has heard God's audible voice, and that there are instances throughout his life experience where he has seen God work very clearly. And I'm not going to invalidate that. That hasn't been my experience, and it very well might have been his. But even if that is the truth, even if that is the case, obviously I've been a part of his life, and I've worked in his life, and I've worked beside him, I've had conversations with him, and yet still somehow this conversation that I was having with him was still a surprise. Somehow he didn't know these things about me beforehand.
Yeah.
Even though I hadn't been super secretive about my whole deconstruction process, I had been posting about it on Facebook for a while. Like posting links to my blog. I even posted a couple links to this podcast. And I even posted one link to the very first TikTok I made on the topic of Christian arrogance. So there was plenty of ways that they could have gone and seen where I stood. But they just didn't. And so I kind of forget where I was going with that.
How does that make you feel? I'm your therapist now. No.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's super frustrating because it's like I put all this time, work, and effort into it. And I remember where I was going with that. I had not been super secretive about my process, my beliefs, where I was. And yet somehow in this conversation, despite how active I've been in my father's life and my grandpa's life, they still didn't know me. They were still surprised at where I stood and how I believed, how I thought. So just because God is active in their life or maybe spoke to them audibly, it does not automatically confirm every single belief or assumption that they have made about the nature of God. So it very well might be, and I guess that's also where some of that frustration comes from, because it might be that those are all very true, valid experiences that my parents and my grandparents have had. But it bothers me a little bit that they're then using those experiences to confirm their idol. I don't know. Or it might be their idol. I don't know. Maybe they do have it all figured out. Maybe they have it totally reasoned. But I wish that if that were the case, that they would help me with that. And from the conversations that I've had so far, it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be that they are using their experiences to further their belief that they couldn't possibly be wrong in their understanding of God. That's frustrating.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really hard to have conversations with people who are so driven by fear, and like when that's just such a huge factor in their belief system, because like you're coming at this with so much thought and intention, and like it's hard to engage when you're coming from a place, like from their place of like being afraid for you or being afraid of if they explore those things, and like it really hinders a lot of deeper thought, because there's this fear of like, oh, if I go there, what if I end up like him, And
speaking of that fear,
like
Was
And
it levied
then
at you, like
fear.
the fear and
Yeah.
concern for your salvation and whether or not you'd be in heaven?
Oh, we'll get there.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So my parents did not, and I'm very grateful for that. Though I mean, they did say they didn't like they've never levied that against me, which I've been very thankful for.
Mm.
They did this one part where this is like one of the first times I've ever like pushed back on something my parents said. They said at one point in our conversation, as long as we, agree on Jesus, then like, I think all these other disagreements aren't like huge deals. And I partly appreciate that they said that, but I said if I'm being honest, I don't know if I believe in Jesus right now, and I don't know if I will, like as I continue down this journey. So like that's to give you an idea of where I'm at. But also these disagreements, quote unquote, that you say maybe aren't a big deal, they are to me, because they aren't just ideas, they're not just beliefs. But every idea and belief we have takes form. It takes action. And so, like, if you believe poorly about people, if you believe harmful things about them, you're going to treat them in harmful ways. And so, these aren't just ideas that we can just disagree on, because they have very real world effects. And so, I did like, I'm not saying anything new. Like, if they were to hear me saying this here, like that's what I said over the call, and I think they understood. But I think that's a big part of these conversations as well, is like people think it really just comes down to the belief, but like for me it really comes down to the life you're living. Like I don't necessarily care what you believe. I care about the life you're living. I care about how you treat people. I care about how you interact and like view people and what you're doing to like better this world. And what I see is that a belief, and especially beliefs about like the afterlife, very much hinder that. You very much hinder you from living, I think, a good life. And so like it's more than just a disagreement on a belief, for me
That's
at least.
that's actually a conversation I haven't had yet. It's one that I guess you could say I've been putting off to some extent.
Yeah.
Like I think we've touched very lightly on the subject, but how did they take that? So I mean, I haven't had that conversation yet, so I'm curious how it went for you when you expressed that.
I didn't get much of a response, and I think they had a lot to process already. That was just another thing I added to their processing. And I wasn't ready. Well, like I said, I was not ready for this conversation, so I wasn't ready to continue to stand up for myself if they were to push back again. And so I was glad they didn't really respond, because honestly, I don't know what I would have done at that point.
I think that there is this
Yeah.
interesting. There's a tendency for there to be a one-way street of concern, and I think that your conversation, especially bringing that up, shows the reality that it's actually a two-way. It's a mutual street, in that they might be concerned for the exact same things, that our beliefs and what we now support and what we push are harmful and damaging and going to be detrimental. And they are concerned for our salvation and whether or not we'll be burning it for an eternity in conscious torment of hell. But there's a mutual concern, and I feel like you've spoken to a big part of that, in that there's the toxicity and the moral stunting that can occur within a religion, within Christianity especially. That is a conversation that needs to be had, and that's something I actually hadn't really thought a whole lot about, surprisingly. But what I had thought about, in terms of the mutual concern, I don't necessarily subscribe to any concept of hell. If there is a hell, though, the only way I could imagine it justly existing would be one where it is consensual hell, in a way.
Yeah.
And that I fear that people will stand before a God that they do not recognize because they've made an idol of their understanding, and believing him to be, or them to be, the deceiver, will turn their backs on God and heaven and go to wander through hell seeking their idol. And I fear, if there is any kind of hell, if that is a space that exists in any form, I fear for my family, honestly.
Interesting.
That they would turn their back on God in favor of their idol. And they can't they might think they can say the same thing about me, but the thing is, I am in a place of uncertainty. I do not claim to know who God is. I am leaving that in God's hands to do. Like, he can tell me who he is, or she is, they. That is a responsibility that I'm placing in their hands because it's always been in their hands. As a human being with the limits that I have and the restrictions I have, I could never discover God by any effort of my own. That is, of course, assuming certain attributes of God. But, yeah, there's that mutual concern. And just because... And it's interesting, I feel like expressing that disarms. And I haven't done it yet, but I intend to. I hope it'll disarm the conversation from being well, I'm afraid you're going to go to hell, and so you should be afraid too. And so I'm going to use this fear tactic to try and manipulate you back into conformity. But if I am fearful that by conforming I might end up in hell due to some possibility, suddenly that fear tactic is disarmed. In that one way or the other, there is fear. Yeah. It's unavoidable, so why concern ourselves with it?
Yeah, I think, that is definitely one avenue you can take. I wouldn't take, personally, like, I don't know if I would take that one. Yeah. But like, yeah, if you think that would, like, a lot of this is like, you need to do what is going to work for your, like, your relationship with your parents is probably the best. Like, I can't speak into that, and like anyone listening, I have no idea. So like, I can't tell you what you should or shouldn't do. Like, what is best. Like, if you need to just have kind of like a coming out moment and just like have a Zoom call with them, or like go over to their house over dinner, or if you need to let it out slowly, or if you just need to not talk about it, maybe for your safety, like maybe you're financially dependent on them, like get not financially dependent on them before you have these conversations, like, I can't tell you or really even advise you on what you should do. I can give you some options, and like, we can tell our stories, and you can see what maybe you relate with or what you think would happen, but you're going to have to make that call.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, like, I would not bring up the possibility of hell if I didn't recognize it as a possibility. I only am going to bring up concepts of hell that I recognize as being possible, and maybe even something that's, I guess, might be worth hoping for, in terms of if hell is a temporary place where somebody can work out their crap. And it's more like a purgatory than anything. Like, I think a purgatory style hell is the only thing that I can really put myself behind in terms of possibilities. Personally, I don't feel the need to hope for it in most cases, but especially in this situation where the fear of hell is being used as a weapon against me, I find value in recognizing the possibility if I can disarm that weapon. So that's the only reason why I bring that up. And I recognize and I understand why other people might not be able to. It very much depends on the relationship and also where you find yourself personally. So I totally agree.
I'll just quickly say what my most recent conversation has been with my wife's family. So with their family, my wife was especially not ready for that conversation because we knew they weren't going to respond probably as well as my parents. And so we took the route of letting things out slowly and kind of hinting at where we're going. And so, like, sadly, as we've thought about it, a lot of these things have been political, but like in the realm of Christianity nowadays, like, I feel like that's most of it is like your political views kind of determines your denomination, which is so stupid, but whatever.
That really is stupid.
So anyways, like, we've pushed back on certain issues until one night we were talking and their parents are super into like end timesy, like we're in the end times and like the rapture's coming, like all this stuff. And I was just straight up like, I don't believe in that for many reasons, until we got the topic of hell and we're like, yeah, we don't really believe in hell either. And so obviously that raised a lot of questions. Yeah, it all kind of came to a head one night. So through that conversation, we kind of divulged everything. And I mean, it was interesting. She was gracious through the conversation, but said some interesting things. For example, asked us if we were doing drugs, and we said no. But that's one of those misconceptions that it's like, as soon as you're not a Christian, you're out doing drugs and killing people. It's like, nope, that's not the case. And there are some other things.
You're trying to figure out, what sin did you leave for?
Yeah, always the accusation. And then another thing she said is like, well, like, I have hope that, like, I'm glad you guys are seeking and like trying to find answers, and like, that's great. Like, you really need to do that and like believe them for yourself and not just believe them because you're told to. It's like, yes, okay, good. This is good. This is a good way this conversation can go. It ended up being okay. Like, the conversation went, she didn't break down crying and telling us we're going to hell. She insinuated that we might. And she's like, aren't you worried about the rapture and like end time stuff coming? And I'm like, I don't believe it's coming. I don't believe that. Like, I just don't believe that. So I think like that was good for us on that side of the family, is like taking it, like just hinting it as we go. Like, it still like killed us inside because we still kind of felt like we were hiding this secret and like not being our authentic selves. But I think my suggestion is like, for those of you who are like weighing, like, do I tell them, do I not? Like, you need to weigh like, what is more painful for you at the moment? Is it living inauthentically, or is it the idea of that conversation, the relationship changing, the accusations that are going to come? And once one of those starts to outweigh the other, then that's whenever I think you've got a decision that you can make and be valid in making that. And so it came to a point where we, like, for a while, having that conversation was more terrifying than living inauthentically and kind of just hiding this. But eventually it came to a point of, you know what, I am sick of hiding. I'm so sick of just not living authentically. And so it's just better to go through that, because living authentically outweighed that uncomfortable conversation. And so that's something to think about. And if I were to give any advice, that would be it, because that's very personal to you, and you know yourself better, and how painful even that conversation will be.
One of the things that my grandpa's friend said was this whole idea of like, how he would always tell people who were doubting and falling away. It's just absolutely horrible. But he would tell them, oh, what are you going to do someday when you're in hell and your kids come to hell and they come to you and they ask you the question, why didn't you tell us about Jesus? And that is just the most stupid thing I've ever heard in my whole life. Because my response would probably be, I did tell you. I told you everything I knew about Jesus, and I encouraged you to learn more. And I told you everything I knew about anything else.
Oh my gosh. Well, it sounds like we need a part 2, because we are out of time, and I think we still have a lot to talk about. Good conversation. Thanks for sharing your story. If you want to connect with Christian and I, you can find me at Pondering Together on TikTok. You can find him at Truth Voyager. And you can always find our highlights of the podcast on Morning Ponderings. And it does look like we are going to be going to bi-weekly episodes now, but we will keep you all updated. Thank you all for joining us this week, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Catch you later.
Have a great day.
Sounds good. Would you like to do that, or shall I?
Cool, I guess I'll do it. Yeah, sorry. I didn't know it was going to happen here. Sure, I'll introduce it. So